welcome. This is the second part of my XtraBackup talk. Thank you very much for joining. Okay, let's move forward with my talk. I got a recommendation to move my location because you can see me when you have the chat window open. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not that beautiful, so it's not really very important. Thank you, Ronald, for your help. And well, pretty much I'm the same guy that I was in the previous talk. No significant differences. Maybe just a little bit more tight, but really very glad of having the opportunity to explain and to talk with you about XtraBackup and backups in general. In this second talk, we will cover some advanced topics like encryption, creating replicas, partial backups, and things like that. Let's go to the first part of the talk. It's how to set up a replica. The process to set up a replica is quite simple. It's pretty much it's quite similar to the process of setting up a replica using MySQL DAM, but the good thing is that a great deal of the job is performed by XtraBackup. As we know, XtraBackup generates a consistent copy of the source database. This means that this consistent copy can be used for replication. And as we saw in the previous talk also, it provides the current binary log file and position. So this means that creating a replica from using a backup is also almost automatic. There's only one thing you need to take into consideration is that this replica will be replicating from the backup source. So for example, if you have a topology where you have multiple levels of replication and you have one master and several replicas, and you want to add a replica, sometimes making the backup from the source is not ideal because the source usually has to deal with writes, and it's better to create a same level replica. You can do this using a specific flag that we will see later. So to set up a replica, the first step is really very easy. You have to make a backup. Okay. So to create a backup in the same level, you need to add the flag use slave information, and this file generates the XtraBackup slave info file. This file contains, not exactly, but contains a change master command that you could use to build a new replica. Why I'm not saying not exactly? Well, because it does not include the credentials that you should use to set up replication. If you are going to set up replication, you're running with binary logs enabled, but what happens if you are not using role-based replication? If you are not using role-based replication, you need to add an additional flag that is use save slave backup. What this flag does is stopping replication and waiting until all the temporary tables are closed to be able to perform the backup consistent. The safe slave backup is also useful if you have an environment where lots of tables are created and dropped or modified. You can use this parameter to force the source for your backup not to replicate from the master that is executing all those changes. Obviously, this means that uh, you may have some latency after the backup because one of the replicas is not copying. Uh, and do not use no logs. It is possible to run XtraBackup saying, okay, don't execute any kind of log on the tables. This can be used, for example, on environments where lots of DDLs are executed, and this will generate an inconsistent backup, but this backup could be used, for example, for partial recovery. So if we want to be able to recover one table and not a consistent view of the database, we can use the no logs flag. Well, the second step is quite simple. We transfer the backup to a new replica. We prepare the backup, and then we have to configure the replica server. Usually, the usual process is to use my.cnf config file as a sample, but you need to take into consideration that you need to change the server ID and you need to remove the auto.cnf file because there is where the UUID of the database is stored. So you want to generate a new UUID for the database in order to make sure that the replica has a different ID. Okay. I did not say it before, but this part of the talk setting a new replica requires some knowledge on replication. So if you don't have knowledge on replication, maybe some of the concepts I'm talking about will not be clear for you. But the idea is that you need to understand that you can create a replica using XtraBackup and using the parameters. This is completely documented. You will find tons of blog posts, and it's also documented in the XtraBackup documentation. Having said that, two parameters that I strongly recommend in replication environments. One is the replicas, set the replicas read-only to avoid writing on a replica by mistake. And the other one is enabling a skip slave start. The purpose of enabling a skip slave start is that sometimes if there's a change in topology or something wrong, let's say wrong happens to the infrastructure, you don't want when you start your database, and this often happens when you start the server, that database to start replicating can be an issue. So, well, it's a parameter that you should consider enabling. If you enable it, when you start the replica, it will it will start, but it will not continue replicating until you say, okay, start a slave. And after doing all these steps, you can start MySQL D on the replica server. The third step, to be able to replicate, you need to have credentials in the source server that will be used by the replicas to get the information from the database. This step is optional if there is already a user with this privilege. The privilege is the replication slave privilege. Now you have to configure replication. The fourth step is configuring replication on the replica. Sorry for using the word replica so often, but well, it's replication. Um, you need to check the contents of XtraBackup binlog info if you want to replicate from the server that provided the backup. We've seen this before in our first talk, that there's a file XtraBackup binlog info that contains the binary logs information. There is also a file that contains this information, and this information is also dumped in the output of the XtraBackup command. So if you keep the logs, you have different ways to get this information. And even I think if you lose this information, you can get it from the results of the prepare statement. So even if for whatever reason you lose this information, you will get it when you run the prepare. To configure the replication, you need to issue the change master command with host, user, password, and binary position if needed. If you are not using, if you are using GTID, then it's almost automatic. It will start replicating. After that, you just need to check that replication is running fine, and that's it. So the official XtraBackup documentation says that you need 6 steps in to build a replica. I just put 4 steps, and some of the steps are, I would say, quite trivial. Streaming backups. What does streaming backups mean? It means that we are able to write the backup into the standard output, and this means that we can pipe this standard output using other commands. This gives us a lot of flexibility because we can, for example, monitor the speed of a backup, or we can even send the backup to a different location. To stream the backups, long time ago, XtraBackup used the tar format, but now it's using its own format. It's called XtraStream. The advantage of XtraStream is that it allows parallelism, so it's quite fast, and it also performs a checksum of the contents. So, for example, if you transfer your backups across the network, if you will have an additional degree of integrity, because XtraStream will perform a checksum of the blocks that are being transferred, and when it de-streams those blocks, it will check that the checksum is valid. As you are using XtraBackup to the standard output, to stream into the standard output, you can do also one thing. It's you can pack the backup into a single file. this can be helpful under some circumstances because the XtraBackup tool generates a bunch of different files. When you have a single file, it's easier to move or even to store for example, in an object-based storage. You will not have a ton of objects created. You will create just one object. It supports parallel compression and it supports parallel file copying. One thing that you must be careful is that XtraBackup usually checks if a file exists and never overwrites. But if you use streaming as you're using the standard input and the standard output, you can redirect and just overwrite a streamed file. Here we have, I'm going to disappear. Okay. This way you can see it perfectly. When we stream, we can stream into a single file. For example, in the first case, we are streaming into a file that it's stored in a temporary directory. We just need to say stream format XBStream. If we want to use a compressed single file, we can use the compress flag, and even we can use encryption. This is something we will see later, but encryption is quite easy. You just need to tell the algorithm for encryption and which is your encryption key. And of course, you can do everything. You can store in a single file, you can store it compressed, and you can encrypt the backup. So once you stream into a single file, you may want to unstream the backup, this single file, and write it into multiple files. To do this, instead of using XtraBackup, we use a utility that comes with XtraBackup called XBStream. This utility is used for generating streams, and you can use it for extracting and for creating a stream. So you could even replace tar or any command you're using with XBStream to copy files. In this case, if we want to restore a single file, what we do is we specify the location where we want to de-stream the files. We say that we are extracting, and we provide the source file. In the case of a compressed file, it's just the same, but we say decompress. And for an encrypted file, we use the crypt with the encrypt key. And again, we can do everything. We can decompress and decrypt at the same time. Streaming locally have sense, but not it's not the main purpose. The ideal streaming is sending the backup to a different location, because this means that we are placing some of the disk burden on the destination. Instead of copying locally and then transferring, we just perform the backup and transfer at the same time. I like to call this backup and stream. So for in this example, I use Netcat, but you can use any software that allows you um, to transfer files from one using a standard input, of course, from one server to another. Even you could use multicast transfers, and you could send the backup to different servers at the same time if you need, for example, to rebuild a complex infrastructure with a number of replicas. The first step is in the destination. We run netcat and we instruct it to listen on a port, whatever port you want. Obviously, it has to be an available port and accessible through the firewall. And what we say is everything that comes from the network, send it to XtraStream and tell to decompress on this location. Sorry, my mouse is too sensitive. Um, Once we have this running, we just need to start a backup, not tell that the backup is going to be streamed. Um, some files are generated, so you have to define a target directory, but it's not required. You could use the current directory. Um, and then you tell netcat to send to the destination host on the destination port. The dash capital N flag sometimes is needed because netcat is not able to recognize that the communication has been completed. So if you see that at the end of the backup both communication channels are open, you need to add this flag. Otherwise, you can just ignore it. Let me check if there's any question. And is any difference between replica and a slave? Replica is considered politically correct and a slave is not. So that's not any difference. In case of streaming, will the standard output contains both the data file content and the changes from the logs? I guess you're asking about the output log. The output log is sent to the standard error. You see both things on the screen, but are different. One is the standard output and the other is the standard error. So streaming will send the backup to the standard output, and all the messages from XtraBackup will appear on the screen, unless you redirect also a standard error to whatever you want to do. And Jefferson is asking, is there a way to stream the backup directly to AWS S3 bucket? Yes. Tanu is asking, XtraBackup is available for MySQL 8.022. I think it is. Actually, I think the version I was using is 8.023. But I have to check. I think it is available. Let's move forward with partial backup and restore. Sorry. It's a problem of having multiple screens. Well, it is possible to restrict tables and databases to backup. So before somebody asked if it was possible to just backup one database, it is possible. And even it is possible to restore or to backup, just one table. Okay. And I'm saying backup. I'm not saying restore. Obviously, you can also restore just one table, but it's important to know that you can also backup just one table. You have different options. You have tables and tables file, In the tables file, you need to provide a list of the tables you want to backup. Using the tables parameter, you need to provide a regular expression that fits in the description, the name, database, and table name. And pretty much the same for databases and databases files. In the case of the file, you need to use one line per record. And the syntax is quite simple. As for example, if we want just to backup the tables from the employees database, we could use something like this, or say databases equal employees. This is the sample output of a partial backup. As we can see here, it is skipping some files. In this case, I just selected the undo or IB log files, but it will skip any file it is not needed. And we see that it is copying the employees. It also needs the IB data. So if you have a large IB data, it will be copied also. But you just need it for the copy. You don't need it for the restore. And as usual, complete OK is the signal of a successful XtraBackup operation. So once we make a partial backup, if we want to perform a partial restore, we can't use the copy back option that we saw before. We just can prepare and add also the option -- export. This is because this process involves some manual operations in the destination database. Because as we are doing a partial restore, we could even restore this table in a different database. So it's quite complex. So the process is we do a prepare and export, and this generates the IBD and configuration files needed to perform an import of that table space. Okay, so the flow is when you want to import one or to partially recover one table, you need to discard the table space. Then you copy the IBT and the CFG files to the corresponding database directory, and then you import the table space. Very important, check permissions and ownership of the files you are copying. Usually it's the owner should be MySQL account. And something quite important, if you want to be able to perform partial recovery, you need to know the structure of the table. One recommendation, for example, if you want to be able to do partial recovery, perform a MySQL dump without data of the database. This is something I usually recommend for all the backup methodologies, is to add a copy of the structure of the database. It could even help in the case of corruption or something that it needs more advanced recovery. Throttling and performance. Well, the thing is that a backup can use a lot of resources and can read a lot of data. Actually, it will read the whole database, and this database can be in production, And then the problem is that XtraBackup will read as much as possible and as fast as possible. So this can lead to latency issues, slow response, and things like that. To avoid this, XtraBackup allows you to what it's called throttling. XtraBackup accesses data in chunks of 10 megabytes, and it does as fast as possible, as I said. So the process is I read 10 megabytes and I write 10 megabytes. I read 10 megabytes and I write 10 megabytes. If we throttle, what we say is how many of these operations can take place in 1 second. So for example, if I throttle to one, it will read only 10 megabytes and write 10 megabytes. At most, write 10 megabytes. Because, for example, if it's an incremental backup, it could read more than 10 megabytes, but in modified pages, it could write less than 10 megabytes. Okay, it's quite simple. The option is throttle -2. This means that it will complete 2 of these operations per second. Sorry. One thing important, throttling, the higher the value, the less you are throttling. Okay, so the limit is 10 megabytes per second. If copying 10 megabytes per second is a problem for you, probably you need to upgrade your infrastructure. Okay, more options to improve performance. You can use parallelism. You can use different threads to copy the database files. Parallel only affects the number of threads that read and write data files. This means that does not apply to prepare, but it applies to decompress and decrypt. Okay, because it's the compression and decryption and encryption also is performed on a per file basis. Okay, so when we compress each file, and when we encrypt its file. This means that if we have a stream backup with compression and encryption, we have a stream of compressed files. We don't have a stream of files that is compressed. Okay. If we want to increase the parallelism for compression and encryption, we can use specific parameters. Compressed threads obviously defines the number of threads for parallel compression, and encrypt threads the number of threads for parallel encryption. The main reason to have different parameters for when you generate a backup, I mean, when you compress or encrypt and you have parallel, you have 3 different backups, is because usually the component that you want to fine tune is when you perform the backup. Okay, so for example, if you are performing a backup on a running system, if the system is running with a limitation of input-output operations, the number of parallel threads that copy files will impact on this. So probably you will throttle better by using, by tuning the number of parallel threads you are using. At the same time, the compressed threads and encrypt threads impact on CPU. So this way we have 2 parameters that we can use to say, okay, I want to be able to to encrypt or compress more more content, and I want to be able to, for example, to read or write less content from disk. So you can play a little bit with these options. How to tune prepare? Well, there's a flag called use memory that is used to tune the amount of memory that is used for prepare operations. Prepare operations are not usually are not IO bound operations rather than memory and CPU bound, especially memory. And so you will find a real increase in performance, and prepare will be performed really faster if you increase the amount of memory for preparing operations as much as possible. The flag to change this is use memory, and it supports, you don't need to make strange calculations. You can use the 10 gigs, for example, or things like that. Point-in-time recovery. Let me check if there's any. Which isolation level is used in on XtraBackup? On XtraBackup, isolation levels don't impact at all on XtraBackup because XtraBackup is a physical backup. It's not a logical backup. So it has no impact at all. The isolation level. The isolation level will have impact on collateral things, like, for example, the size of undos or the number of not the number, but probably the how often logs are overwritten. But it's not, there is not any specific isolation level for XtraBackup. Alexi, I will repeat my previous unanswered question. What is this method to make partial restore from a full backup? Well, once you have a full backup, you can prepare and use the export flag, and this will generate the CFG file required to import partially a table. You just can import partially import no. You just can restore partially a full table. Okay, you can't restore partially part of the table. There is only one exception. If the table is partitioned, you could try to recover just one partition. Okay, and this should be feasible. Okay. Johannes asks if it's possible to exclude tables from backup for specific databases. I don't think so. You could generate no, you can. No. Well, you could write a regular expression that includes everything but the tables you want to exclude. But well, I know regular expressions, but I'm not a guru of regular expressions. You could also generate a list of tables every time you want to do the backup, and then just remove those tables. Okay. I think that I more or less replied all the questions. Point-in-time recovery. Well, point-in-time recovery is based on backups plus binary logs. So if you want to do point-in-time recovery, you need to have the binary logs enabled, and you need to store those binary logs somewhere. The idea in this case, considering that we are making the point-in-time recovery on the same server, is to prepare and copy back the backup. Copying back the backup uh, would fail because probably the files already exist, but there's a flag that allows you to overwrite them. Then you retrieve the backup position from the XtraBackup bin log info, and you just need to apply those binary links until the desired time you want to recover. In this case, was it should be sorry. Those are the binary logs. You say the starting position and the stop date time, and you apply those changes. Backup encryption. We will cover two subjects here. One is backup encryption, and the other one is backup of encrypted databases. The backup encryption, we've seen examples before, and it's quite simple. You just need to use the encrypt key, and or you can say where is the encrypt key located by using the encrypt key file. You can support different algorithms. You can tune encryption by using multiple threads and larger or smaller chunk sizes. And obviously, the backup must be decrypted before being prepared. There is, as we've seen, there is the XtraStream. There is also a tool called SXBcrypt that can be used to encrypt and decrypt files. So this is an example of an encrypted backup. This is the output, and as you can see here, it says it's encrypted in the file, and it generates XBcrypt extension to know that the file is encrypted using uh, XBcrypt. To decrypt the backup, uh, we can just use XtraBackup with the decrypt option and the encrypt key. And this is important. The remove original option uh, tells us to remove the encrypted files. If we don't do this, we will have both encrypted and the unencrypted files. This is the output of the backup decryption. In this case, I use the remove original flag, and as you can see, it's decrypting and removing, decrypting and removing. Backup of encrypted databases. Uh, this means that we can also make backups of databases that are encrypted at rest in the storage. We have two plugins. One is using a Keyring file, and the other one is using HashiCorp Vault to store the Keyrings. Um, I'll cover this quite fast. I have no experience with Vault, so I wanted to test before the conference, but I had not enough time. I know there are some compatibility issues. You have to use a specific version of Bolt. So this is something you need to test. Probably for some of you, this is critical for compliant reasons. Under some circumstances, you need something like bold, and using Keyring file is not enough. But it's quite simple. You just need to provide the Keyring file, and it's able to perform the backup. To prepare, obviously, you need access to the Keyring file. The Keyring file is not included with the backup, so you need to keep a copy of the Keyring file if you want to be able to prepare the backup. Uh, Somebody asked if it's possible to store backups in the cloud. Yes, it is. Uh, XtraBackup supports the most important vendors, um, OpenStack Swift, Amazon S3, Google Cloud Storage, and Minayo. Uh, the way to perform the store in the cloud backup is streaming the backup to the XB Cloud utility. XB Cloud utility allows you to perform three basic operations: get, put, and delete. And depending on the cloud vendor you are going to store the backup to, you need to use specific versions. In the examples we will see today, I used Google, but you can use Amazon or whatever is your best option. We support Amazon S3 and all the compatible alternatives. Important to note that the backup is stored in the cloud in an unprepared status. You need to download to prepare. And as some of the XB Cloud parameters are a bit tough keys and things like that, you can store these parameters on the myCNF file in a specific section called XB Cloud. This is also important because you can protect this file from undesired access. This is an example of a backup stored into the cloud. As I said before, we are going to use Google. So here we have all the different Google specific options. In this case, I used a bucket called XtraBackup test. It supports parallelism. You can name the directory in the bucket, and we are saying XB Cloud. The operation to perform is put, and what we do is we perform the backup with the streaming. Somebody asked before how to get the last sequence number. This is the parameter to store the last sequence number in a different location. It will store it also with the backup, but it will also store it in this case in the temporary directory. Important to note that even if we are streaming, we will not have a single file. Okay, in the bucket we will have a file per each file from the backup. So in this case, streaming is not generating a single file. Generates a stream, but XB Cloud chops this stream, in the different files and pushes those files to the cloud. as we can see here. This is the output of a streamed backup to the cloud. Um, One thing here, if you look here, you will see enter password and something strange. Well, the thing is that in this case, uh, XB Cloud tries to connect and verify the credentials while I was typing the database password. So the log of both comments overlapped, but it's important because the first thing that XB Cloud does is checking if it's able to transfer the file. So here we have the log of both commands together. We have the log of XB Cloud. It says successfully uploaded chunk, and we have the log of XtraBackup. Okay. How? 1 second. Oops. Okay. Something important. As here we are using two commands, XtraBackup that pipes to XB Cloud. Uh, we have a different command last line in the log. So in this case, the last line is upload completed. To restore the backup from the cloud, first we need to download it. So we need to perform a get operation with pretty much the same parameters. This is the output of the, the restore operation. And last but not least, we have just a couple of minutes, XtraBackup for Windows. There is no version of Percona XtraBackup for Windows. Okay, but it is possible to use Percona XtraBackup on a Linux box to back up a database running on Windows. This is an unsupported process, but it can be done. I've done, and it works. You need to tell XtraBackup to connect to the Windows server. You need access to the Windows Server data directory, and you need to specify some additional options to XtraBackup. You have to tell him to read from the directory you mounted from the Windows box, and you need also to specify some binary log options if the Windows box is using binary logs. Then this backup can be prepared. You have the backup stored on Linux. You can prepare it. And if you plan to run that database on Linux, you need to add the lowercase table names to my.cnf. And that's it. You can perform a backup from a Windows box using Percona XtraBackup. At the beginning, this may seem a little bit, performing a backup from Windows using Linux, but a lot of backup softwares are already running on Linux. So the only thing you need to do is install XtraBackup on the backup server and then run this procedure. It's unsupported, but it works. I tested successfully in production, not in our laboratory, and I plan to write a blog post soon about this. To recap, well, why I call XtraBackup the Swiss Army knife of backups. You can do different kinds of backups. You can perform safe and secure backups. You can tune. It's compatible between different versions. It allows you to stream remotely or to the cloud. And it's a complete backup solution for MySQL that is fully and completely open source. We have 3 minutes. I'll check the questions, but thank you very much. Does backing up directly into S3 support incremental backups? Yes, but you must remember that you need to transfer to locally. So you will need to recover the full backup, apply logs, recover the first incremental, apply logs, and so on. If using Percona server with my rocks, will XtraBackup also work? Yes, it works. Well, thank you very much. Um, there's a link. Um, Please provide your feedback about my talk, and thank you very much for your time. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any question or send me an email. Thank you very much. Bye.